Today we'll be making a sweet red bean paste that's usually found in Eastern Asian countries and desserts. Typically, sweet red bean paste found in those countries is made with adzuki beans. However, we will be swapping that out today with red beans grown here in the Northarvest region of Minnesota and North Dakota. For this recipe, we will need brown sugar, white sugar, red beans, corn syrup, and salt. Okay, let's make some red bean paste. First things first, we're gonna open, drain, and rinse 2 cans of red beans. Once we get these opened, drained, and rinsed, we will add them to our blender with 3 cups of water, and we will blend them. Tight squeeze, but we got it. We'll give these a rinse now. We will add these to the blender with 3 cups of water and blend it until it's completely pureed. In theory, we could be doing this with beans that we've cooked on the stove. However, by using canned, makes it a little bit easier and it's a bit of a cheat. And off we go. Anytime I'm blending anything, I like to start it slow and increase the temperature, or speed, as the case may be. Once the beans and water have been pureed, we're gonna drain them into a colander lined with either cheesecloth or muslin. Another thing you could use here would be a nut bag, which is often used to remove pulp when making nut milks. I don't have one of those, but I do have muslin, so muslin is what we're using today. This can take a minute, it's a bit of a process, and we wanna go just slow enough that we don't lose the volume of the pulp itself. The pulp is what we're after. So we may need to do this in 2 batches. Pick up the corners and kind of give it a little squeeze to get that water out. What we're after here is purely the pulp of the beans themselves. My colander doesn't sit super high over the bowl, so that, again, as we're doing this in batches, we may need to take a minute to ditch some of that water. And we'll muscle through it to get as much liquid out of it as possible. Ideally, we're looking for a nice dry paste made of just the pulp from those beans. As you see, we're getting there with what's sticking to the sides of the muslin itself. That pulp right there is what we're looking for, minus the water. Missed an edge there, but again, no big deal. We'll scrape off those chunky bits and add them later just to get that water out. At this point, there's no danger of overworking this. The drier we can get this paste, the more ideal. Because sugar technically acts as a wet ingredient, once we add that sugar to cook it down, it'll rehydrate with the viscosity that the sugar will bring to the table. If you feel it, we're getting there, but it's a nice dry paste. Add a little bit more and give it another squish. Try and get all the edges this time so I don't lose any volume. Pause for 1 second to ditch the water in my bowl. Keep on trucking. Almost there. This might be the most labor-intensive part of this entire process. At the end of the day, this should yield close to 2 cups of paste. The recipe that we'll start with today only requires a half a cup, which leaves us enough extra that we may be able to use it for another application. Just when you think you've got all the water out, give it 1 or 2 last big squeezes and you'll see exactly how much water we'll lose. I do the same thing when I'm squeezing potatoes out to make latkes. Once we get all the liquid out of this, we're gonna add it to a pot with our sugar and salt and cook it down until it becomes the sweet bean paste we're looking for. Right now it's just bean paste. That's why we'll add some sugar. Once we get this nice and dry, we'll add it to a pot along with our other ingredients and cook it down to the sweet bean paste we're looking for. If you notice, it almost has a really thick peanut butter-like quality to it, and that's what we're looking for. Paste-like. I'm gonna wash my hands, and we'll grab a pot to put this in. So we'll give these beans one last good squeeze to get that water out, and then we'll take a minute to scrape that pulp off this muslin and into this pot. We want to try and get as much off the muslin as we possibly can, and usually it'll stick in one nice ball. But it would behoove us not to get these little bits and pieces off. So with my handy dandy bench scraper, bowl scraper, I'll scrape the rest of that pulp. And this muslin you could absolutely wash and reuse, but as far as I'm concerned, has fulfilled its muslin destiny. Once we get our pulp in the pot, we're going to add a half a cup of white sugar, brown sugar, and a half teaspoon of salt, and cook this down until it becomes the texture we're looking for, which is nice and viscous and coats the back of the spoon. So, got a half a cup white sugar. You could use either light or dark brown sugar in this application. I prefer the darker brown sugar, because I think it brings that nice molasses note to the party. Packed half a cup. And a half teaspoon of salt. What most people don't realize is all desserts require a little pinch of salt. And we'll stir this to dissolve that sugar. Once the sugar is incorporated, that tight mass will end up feeling a little bit wet, and that's purely because sugar technically is a wet ingredient, and once it melts, it becomes liquid. Once we get all the sugar incorporated, we're gonna cook this down until it bubbles, and it'll take anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes. Red bean paste is very versatile. In a lot of Asian dishes, it is used in dumplings and buns. Around Chinese New Year, it's typically used to fill mooncakes. One of my favorite things at dim sum is probably a red bean filled steamed bun where they coat them in sesame seeds. Dim sum might be one of my absolute favorite things, and I eat as much of it as possible every time I'm home. The bean paste itself is sweet and starchy. It can be used as fillings in cookies, thumbprint cookies. If you didn't want to go so far as to make buns or mooncakes, it would even work if you wanted to fill it into a crescent roll. Once that sugar starts to melt, you will notice it'll get a little wet, and we're gonna let it go until that wetness evaporates and it gets tighter again. Once that sugar is dissolved, the liquid will evaporate and will become a nice tight paste, as seen right here. Boop. It's been 5 to 7 minutes. Our sugar is dissolved and the liquid is evaporated, and now we have a nice, thick, tight paste. As evidenced right there, because it's coating the spatula perfectly well. It'll also get a little bit tighter as it cools. To this now, we'll kill the heat and add 1 tablespoon of corn syrup. The corn syrup will make it shiny and add a little bit more elasticity to the viscosity. And we'll use our fingers to scrape it out because it's our best tool. Fold that corn syrup in. Makes it nice and shiny, a little more pliable. And then we'll put this in a bowl and allow it to cool completely before we go on to make our cookies. all of it out, just like before. Now, we'll cover this and stick it in the refrigerator and allow it to chill down completely. We need it to be completely cool in order to move on to our next step, which is making the cookies. We are going to use the red bean paste we made earlier with our red beans to make some red bean crinkle cookies. Not only are these cookies delicious, but they're also really beautiful with a crispy exterior and a nice soft cakey crumb in the center. To make these cookies, we will need sugar, flour, red bean paste, unsalted butter, eggs, red food coloring, baking powder, and salt. Let's get started. First things first, we're gonna add our unsalted butter and our sugar to our mixer in order that we will cream it together. Trying not to put too much air into these. To our softened butter, we'll add our sugar. And we'll cream these together until they're nice and homogenous, trying not to add too much air to the mixture. This might take a couple of minutes. In the meantime, we'll measure out our dry ingredients and sift them together. Leveling off the top of the flour as to not pack it in. Very gently. We're measuring out our baking powder as our leavening and adding our salt to our flour in order to sift it together to make sure we don't have any lumps. In the meantime, we'll pause to scrape this down and add our egg and red bean paste. To our sugar and butter, we'll start by adding our egg. One egg is all we'll need for this recipe. In addition, we'll also add a half a cup of our red bean paste. This is where we can also add our red food coloring. It is optional. However, I like to add it because the red bean paste itself has a tendency to turn a little bit gray during the baking process. Just a dab will do ya. And again, we're gonna cream this together until it's all one homogeneous mixture. I'm gonna continue while this is creaming to sift my dry ingredients together to make sure there are no lumps. Like any good creaming process, we're gonna pause this once or twice to scrape down the sides and make sure there aren't any big lumps of butter or bean paste, just so everybody's one happy family. And it allows our flour, once we add it, a chance to be distributed evenly. One more good scrape and a mix, and we'll be ready to add our flour. We're gonna slowly incorporate this flour about a half a cup at a time, just to give it all a chance to mix in well. Make sure we go slow with this, otherwise you'll end up with a face full of flour, and no one wants that, especially in a black shirt. Scrape those dry bits in and we'll add a little more flour. Another mix on low. There we go. One last scrape with the last of the flour and we'll be there. There we go. There's a teeny bit of flour remaining, but we're gonna fold that in by hand. Not unlike shortbread dough, this dough benefits from a nice long rest in the fridge. So once we get this all smooshed together, we're gonna wrap it up and stick it in the fridge for 4 hours or up to overnight. If you're in a hurry, you can wrap it and stick it in the freezer and for about an hour before you form it and bake it. Okay, we're gonna turn this out onto a piece of plastic, wrap it tightly, and refrigerate. The dough's a little sticky now, but that short time in the refrigerator, just like a pie crust or a short dough, will allow all that flour to hydrate and make it much easier to work with later. It'll be far less sticky after it's had a nap. We're going to stick this in the refrigerator for at least 4 hours or up to overnight. And if we're in a hurry, we'll stick it in our freezer for an hour. So now that we've let our dough rest for 4 hours, we're gonna roll it into balls. Once again, I like to roll my balls all ahead of time because now we're gonna get a little bit sticky. We're going to roll them first in some granulated sugar, followed by some powdered sugar. The purpose of the granulated sugar is to get that powdered sugar to stick. The powdered sugar is there to give us those beautiful crinkly crevices that we get on these cookies. Into the granulated sugar, nice little roll, and from there into our confectioner's sugar, also known as powdered sugar, also known as icing sugar. We want to coat them pretty generously because as this cake bakes, it's gonna leave that beautiful lacy powdered sugar edge. This may have been easier with a bigger bowl, but then I'm using twice as much sugar. These will bake off in the oven for 8 to 10 minutes. No matter what, we don't want to overbake these. So if you start to get the bit of color on the outside, that's a sign that you're almost there, if not there already. We want these cookies to be nice and crispy on the outside, but an almost cake-like texture in the inside. These would be great for Valentine's Day, Christmas, Giving Hearts Day. The color when they come out, you'll see, is a really, really beautiful shade of pink. Last one. And into the oven at 325 degrees for 8 to 10 minutes. After 8 to 10 minutes in the oven, these are our red bean crinkle cookies. Resist the urge to dig into these while they're still warm. These cookies are so delicate, we want to give them the opportunity to cool completely on the cookie sheet before we put them on a rack. And once we crack into them, you'll notice a nice crispy exterior and a beautiful cakey interior. Bon appetit. Big thanks to Family Wellness out here in West Fargo for hosting us today, and a wonderful thank you to the Northarvest Bean Growers Association for inviting me here to show you some really fun things with beans. If you enjoyed these recipes, please check out beaninstitute.com or find us on YouTube.